All right, let's plunge into a story that'll give you chills. We're taking a deep dive into Henry James's classic novella, The Turn of the Screw.
Oh, this is one of those stories that gets under your skin.
It really does. It messes with your mind, you know.
Hmm.
You're never quite sure what's real and what's not.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so brilliant. James was a master at psychological suspense.
So for those who might not be familiar with the story, can you give us a quick rundown of the setup?
Sure. So the story starts with this group of people gathered around a fire sharing ghost stories. And one man, he's got this manuscript written by his sister's former governess, and it's about her time at this creepy estate called Bly.
Okay, so right away, we're dealing with a story within a story.
Yeah, which adds this whole other layer of unreliability, right?
Yeah.
We're not getting the story directly from the governess, we're getting it secondhand through this manuscript.
Which makes us question everything we read. Is the governess telling the truth? Is she exaggerating? Is she maybe just a little bit unhinged?
Right. And that's the genius of James's writing. He makes us doubt everything. So this governess, she arrives at Bly, and at first everything seems idyllic.
Yeah, she's young, excited about her new job, and the children, Miles and Flora, seem like perfect little angels.
Exactly. She's exploring this beautiful estate, bonding with the housekeeper, Mrs. Gross. It all seems like a fairy tale.
But then James starts to plant these seeds of doubt, these little hints that something's not quite right.
Oh, absolutely. Like that letter from Miles's school. He's been expelled, but the reasons are never fully explained.
And when the governess tries to get more information from Mrs. Gross, she just gets these vague, unsettling answers.
It's like trying to grab smoke, you know? Something's definitely being hidden.
And then things take a turn for the truly creepy.
Uh-huh. The governess sees this strange man on one of the towers, but he disappears before she can get a good look at him.
But her description is enough to freak out Mrs. Gross.
Big time. Because it sounds exactly like Peter Quint, a former valet at Bly who died under mysterious circumstances.
Okay, so we've got our first ghost sighting.
Right. But James doesn't hit you over the head with it. It's subtle, almost like a whisper in the shadows.
But it's enough to make the governess seriously question her sanity.
Oh, yeah. And then it happens again. This time, it's a woman in black, seen by the lake.
And this time, Mrs. Gross can't deny it. It's Miss Jessel, the previous governess, who also died at Bly.
So we've got two ghosts, both connected to the children in some way. What's going on here?
The governess becomes convinced that these ghosts are back to harm Miles and Flora.
Which is a pretty natural assumption, right? I mean, wouldn't you be terrified if you started seeing ghosts of people connected to the kids you were looking after?
Totally. But here's where James starts to play with our minds. He blurs the lines between reality and perception.
It becomes harder and harder to know what's really happening and what's just the governess's imagination running wild.
And that's what keeps us hooked. We're constantly questioning everything we see and hear.
Exactly. Is the governess a reliable narrator, or is she slowly losing her grip on reality?
And how are the children involved in all of this? Are they innocent victims, or are they somehow connected to these ghosts?
Those are the questions that James wants us to grapple with. And it's what makes The Turn of the Screw such a haunting and unforgettable story. It's like she starts seeing ghosts everywhere, you know?
Yeah, she's convinced they're lurking around every corner, trying to get to the children.
Like she sees Flora staring out the window and she just knows it's Miss Jessel's ghost out there drawing her in.
Or Miles whispering to seemingly no one, and she's sure he's talking to Quint. But we're never really sure if the kids are even aware of these ghosts, right?
Right. I mean, are they just being kids or are they actually communicating with these spirits? That's the brilliance of it. James keeps us guessing.
He's such a master at creating that unsettling atmosphere where you're never quite sure what to believe.
Absolutely. And then there's that scene where Miles suddenly demands to know when he can go back to school.
Oh yeah, that's a really tense moment. It's like this sudden outburst of defiance.
Exactly. And the governess sees it as proof that Quint is influencing him, you know, corrupting him.
It just fuels her paranoia. She's more convinced than ever that she needs to protect these children from the ghosts.
And it all comes to a head when she decides to run away from Bly to get the children to safety, but just when she's about to leave.
She sees Miss Jessel's ghost in the schoolroom, chilling.
Right. It's like the ghost is taunting her, saying, "You can't escape me."
It's almost like a confirmation, you know, that she's not crazy. She really is seeing these ghosts.
Right. But it also isolates her even further because no one else can see them. So who's going to believe her?
And then there's that incredibly tense scene by the lake with Flora.
Oh, that one's a heartbreaker.
The governess is sure that Flora is talking to Miss Jessel's ghost, and she tries to force Flora to admit it. But
It backfires completely.
Flora denies seeing anything, clings to Mrs. Gross, and basically accuses the governess of being delusional.
It's devastating. Even Mrs. Gross, who has been trying to support the governess, starts to doubt her.
The governess is completely alone now, and she's terrified for Flora.
And that leads to a major turning point in the story. Mrs. Gross decides to take Flora away from Bly for her own safety.
Which leaves the governess alone with Miles.
Talk about a pressure cooker situation.
I mean, now she's solely responsible for him,
Mm-hmm.
and she's convinced that he's in grave danger from Quint's ghost.
She becomes fixated on this idea that she needs to save Miles's soul. She thinks if she can get him to confess his connection to Quint, he can be redeemed.
But is she really trying to save Miles, or is she just trying to prove that she's not crazy?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's like she's so caught up in her own fears that she might be putting Miles in even more danger.
And then we have that late-night conversation between the governess and Miles. It's so tense you can practically feel the fear in the room.
Oh yeah, you're just waiting for something to snap.
And Miles, he seems like he's on the verge of confessing, but then he says he needs to see the servant Luke.
Which the governess sees as another sign of Quint's manipulation.
Exactly. And then, in this incredibly chilling moment, Miles is standing by the window, and Quint's ghost appears outside.
Oh, that part always sends shivers down my spine. James doesn't even describe the ghost in detail, but somehow that makes it even more terrifying.
Right. It's like he's letting our imaginations fill in the blanks, and what we come up with is probably way scarier than anything he could have written.
And the governess, she sees Quint and just loses it. She throws herself in front of Miles to protect him, demanding that he name the evil that possesses him.
She thinks that if he says Quint's name, it'll break the ghost's hold over him.
And then Miles screams out, "Peter, Quint!" and collapses. It's just, my heart breaks every time I read that scene.
It's so powerful, so ambiguous. Did Miles actually see Quint? Or was he just repeating the name that the governess had drilled into his head?
I know. Was he truly possessed, or did the governess's fear and obsession basically create a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Because in the end, Miles is dead, and the governess is left holding his body, convinced that she saved him from some evil force. But did she?
That's the question that haunts you long after you finish the book. Did she save him, or did she destroy him?
It's brilliant, really. James doesn't give us any easy answers. He makes us confront our own fears, our own perceptions of reality.
He forces us to look at the darkness that can exist even in the most seemingly innocent places, and to question how much of what we see is actually real and how much is just our own imagination.
You know, that's what makes this story so enduring. It's been over 100 years since it was published, and people are still debating its meaning.
Right. There's something about that ambiguity that just draws you in. You can read it again and again, and each time you might come away with a different interpretation.
Which is why it's such a fantastic book to discuss.
Oh.
It sparks these really deep conversations about good and evil, about sanity and madness, about the power of belief.
It makes you think about the stories we tell ourselves and how those stories can shape our reality.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the turn of the screw, we'll leave you with this question. What did you see in the shadows of Bly? What secrets did you uncover as we journeyed through this chilling tale? We encourage you to explore the full text and come to your own conclusions about this masterpiece of psychological horror.